My name is Shannon Jackson. I'm the Associate Vice Chancellor for the Arts and Design here at UC Berkeley. And it's an incredible, poignant privilege to be here at the last public program that is part of this incredible course, Thinking Through the Arts and Design at Berkeley, focused on California countercultures. As some of you know, this course is supported by the Arts and Design Initiative along with a lot of programming that is an effort to increase communication across the campus and with our wider community about our incredible creative culture. As you came in, you just got cards announcing a new macro website, which we hope you'll turn to in order to find out even more about all that's going on across campus, across the literary arts, the visual arts, performing arts, design, film, and media, as well as forthcoming events. The last event supported by the Arts and Design Initiative in this beautiful BAM PFA theater will be at 6:30 with Dave Pell, Cal alum and founder and writer of Next Draft, where we're going to think about the future of media and culture and politics in a Trump-era presidency. I encourage you to be here at 6:30. According to Michael, we aren't going to have a deliberation tomorrow with Ann Coulter about that topic. It was just announced that she is not coming, but we can continue. All right? We can continue frank, nonpartisan, and I hope, projective, anticipatory, bold deliberation with Dave on Monday. So we hope to see you there next Monday. As I said, a lot of what we're trying to do with the Arts and Design Initiative is to join, and I'll see if I can control the cursor without seeing it. There we go. Is actually to create more programming that invites students to be exposed to as many different art forms as possible, design forms as possible, and to think about the critical questions that animate that history and its future. And it's also very much about attempting to share those ideas with a wider intergenerational community. And when we created this course last year, we had a lot of goals for widening exposure to the arts, for providing arts access to our students, and for having dialogues like this. And I can't tell you how lucky we were to find in Michael Cohen and Natasha Boas people to whom we could hand this baton and who could steward this course in its format with such innovation, brilliance, and energetic commitment. Can you help me thank these two for their incredible leadership, for their incredible dialogue? As you also know, even as we try to make good, and do, I think, make good on our public values of sharing and providing moments, times like this for public deliberation about values and culture that we care about, you also probably know that those public values are not necessarily sustained by public funding. At this point, about 12% of UC Berkeley's budget is funded by the state, and these programs are not. So unfortunately, we have another cut this year that imperils our ability to keep programs like this going next year. We are undaunted. Not only do we want to keep it going, we want to actually expand it so that it is not only a spring semester offering, but so throughout the fall semester and spring semester, you could know that every Wednesday and every Monday night, there will be a regular opportunity to think about the arts, culture, design, creativity for the greater good and for the public values that we care about. So I'd like to just ask you to keep this in your mind and help us think about how we might sustain this going forward. We're going to be dependent not only, since we don't have public dollars, we need some philanthropic dollars to keep this going. So if you care about the goals of these kinds of programs, care about our commitment to keep this free and open to the public, and want us to expand an intergenerational dialogue around these questions and concerns, I encourage you to go to this website, not only to find out about our creative culture, but also to click up in that little menu bar, and here you will find a donate button. And if you also know of people who've enjoyed this kind of programming and might want to see it sustained, to spread the word. We want to keep this going and to make sure that we have the opportunity to continue to serve an incredible community, a public of students and a public like yours. It is our privilege to do so help us keep it going. It is now, with incredible thanks, appreciation, relief, and admiration that I welcome Natasha Boas here to do a last intro, but in hopes of seeing you all back here next Wednesday in the fall. Natasha.
So mad props to you, Shannon, for doing this in our community. Shannon Jackson. Okay, first of all, when you walked in, you were listening to Diva Radio Disco Funk Music Paradise, Mark Pauline's favorite music. I want, I'm not going to repeat what Shannon has said, but I'm going to start to thank you. I'm going to continue on with a series of thank yous before I introduce our esteemed guests today, who will be presenting. They'll be presenting their work, which will be followed by a Q&A with me, and then a Q&A open to the audience. So first to Michael Cohen, my passionate and brilliant co-conspirator and co-professor, whose talents, at countering and teaching are inestimable and inexorable. So, Michael. I would also like to thank our luminaries. So there's been an incredible series of participants and at this very podium, and the participants have read their poetry, they've ranted, they've even cried, they've danced, they've taught, they've fought, they've philosophized and theorized. They have been nostalgic and future-facing. They've encouraged action at a time in the nation and on campus and in the world. We've been struggling with issues not unlike the long 60s and 70s. So they've, in some, narrated a circuitous and complicated and often incomprehensible storyline of California countercultures, plural, multiple countercultures, multiple cultures. And it's at least my hope that they have provided some tools and language and roadmaps to confront our cultural and political situations today. I would also like to thank the group. The Berkeley Art and Design Initiative is BADDY, if you do the acronym. So I'd like to thank the badass women of BADDY. Lauren Pearson, Lindsay Ogle, Susan Miller, Amber Fogarty, and Sarah Dragovich, who have also all worked so hard to bring this all together, and the website as well, which was just launched. Finally, I want to thank the audience. Many of you I've gotten to know. You've actually been regulars. I know your names by now. And over the last 4 months, you've contributed so much to this course with your questions and your enthusiasm, your heckling up from up there. And so thank you. Our students will be posting their final blogs on medium.com as a final project for this course. And I encourage you to go to medium.com Countercultures and look at the work that they've produced for their final semester project. As well, to the audience, our students are eager to have opportunities and internships this summer, so if you have any, please come down and meet with me after the event. And finally, to our students, who are really the center of this curated madness. It's for you guys and with you guys that this course has sort of come to fruition. So I want to thank you. And it's our hope, Professor Cohen's and mine, that the speakers have provided you with some weird tools and ideas to go forth in this world and counter the culture that's being given to you. I'm a strong believer in being disobedient and a strong believer in disobedient objects, which was going to lead me to my next introduction. But to the students. So as Shannon has said, that a course of this kind of complexity and breadth and multi-generationalism that is both public-facing and part of a core curriculum at the University of California, Berkeley for the undergraduates, we can't go forward without asking for encouraging your help going forward to continue these courses into the future. So with this and the idea of the disobedience and the disobedient objects, I'd like to turn to introducing our esteemed final colleagues and guests and artists, and it's a really the perfect way, I think, to end this course. And we started sort of brainstorming with Mark, Pauline, and Amy Critchett on how to entitle this talk. And first we got Go Big or Go Home, which I really like. Ritual Machines Technology with Mark, Pauline, and Amy Critchett. Machine Art, Vision Technologies in the Public with Mark, Pauline, and Amy Critchett. And Machine Art and the Future of Counterculture, or Crash Bang Lightning. I think we came to terms, this morning I thought, what did we decide? But it's over the top when too much is never enough. So we're ending on an incredibly generous and sort of mind-blowing moment. So when I was I don't want to keep saying this, but when I was a teenager in San Francisco, sorry, late 70s, early 80s, the MAB, the Mabuhay Gardens, was our mecca. And Mark Pauline was a god, okay? And basically, you know, when he blew off, his thumb was blown off and various body parts. And, you know, my grandfather was in the French Resistance and he had his thumb blown off. And I was like, this is a similar resistance, right? Where like Mark Pauline is resisting our culture and the prevailing sort of ethos. God, I'm sort of tongue-tied because I've really been waiting for this moment, kind of for a long time now. And so Mark, okay, here we go. Okay, Mark Pauline conceived of and founded Survival Research Labs in November 1978. And since that time, he has operated this SRL, as we call it, as everybody refers to it, as an organization of creative technicians dedicated to redirecting the techniques, tools, and tenets of the industry of science and technology, and away from, and sort of perverting in the etymological sense, their typical manifestation in practicality or product. SRL was our counterculture. We were the generation between the baby boomers and the generation and the Gen X's. We've talked to the students about these fabricated generations. I believe in Gina Pell, who's one of our cohorts here, her idea of being a perennial, and not a millennial or a so I would use the word perennial. But all that said, we were really in this strange between the 70s counterculture, the sort of Peter Coyote storytelling, and then what was our reality, which was really Mark Pauline and Survival Research Lab. I lived at the farm for a summer, and the farm during the day was an urban farm, Bonnie Ora Shirk, whose work is in the Hippie Modernism show and who's one of our great conceptual artists and public practice artists in the Bay Area, started the farm with a utopian vision, and we've talked about these utopian, dystopian vision. During the day, it was an urban farm that was an educational farm for young people in San Francisco and the public school system, and at night, it was a punk rock venue. And at one point, and Mark will talk about it, his studio was there as well. So, so you really have, Mark Pauline, inspired and transformed this whole generation of us. And in many ways, you represented our own disenfranchisement, as I said, and our rage and our specific geography here in the Bay Area in relation to this budding Silicon Valley and world of new technologies. And you blew our minds and made us feel intrepid. Survival Research Lab was and still is a force to reckon with. I was at the lab. The students heard from Dina Beard here in the audience as well, at the lab 24-hour telethon last year, and the SRL siren showed up, and Mark was there with his tribe, and the police shut them down, as usual. And so continuing on until today. Mark has remained outside of the commercial art world and mainstream, has been self-funded and autonomous, but there's nothing nostalgic about his work at all. So again, go big or go home. And very quickly, I'm not going to quote from Vale. I think you're going to be, or will you be quoting from Vale about you? Or no? Oh, I will quote. So Vale was here last week, so if you don't mind, and we're going to finally get everybody up on stage, but Vale said in the 80s, early punk rock in San Francisco was exciting in that you could easily meet perfect strangers from around the world if they were also into punk rock. And I remember meeting Mark Pauline in 1978, and he was dressed in a color nobody else was wearing, and a kind of Carhartt brown-green that shouted the working class. And he continues to say that in talking about Mark's studio, south of Market, was a very sketchy, deserted neighborhood then, mostly warehouses and abandoned machine shops, filled with machinery such as lathes and drill presses, and lots of hard-to-identify steel parts and raw materials. Pauline's new studio shop was conveniently right near the freeway overpass, and the relatively deserted location with its open courtyard permitting wielding and fire hazard to be safely conducted without attracting undue attention from police, fire officials, or annoying neighbors. And he talks about using the sleepily awaiting a Prometheus to transform and repurpose all of this into beautiful new mythological entities capable of functioning as performance art machines. I wanted to quote from two other of our speakers who have also been very influenced by Mark Pauline, or one other, Cal Spelacek, who sent me this quote this morning. Mark changed my life. Cal worked with the SRL group for their European tour. And he empowered me to do whatever the hell I wanted, regardless of the consequences, both to my benefit and my detriment. His work ethic is epic, and his follow-through is monumental. So you're starting to get the lexicon of Mark Pauline. It's very large-scale works. I want to quote again from our very own Ken Goldberg, who's running later. Are you in the audience, Ken? Ken is the professor here of engineering and robotics and an artist. Woo, Ken! Woo, come on up. No, come on down. Come on down. Come on. No, Ken, come down because I might call you onto stage later. Come on down. Okay. Here's Ken Goldberg. Ken says, I've been inspired by Mark and SRL since I was a grad student at CMU in the 1980s. We collaborated on Legal Tender in 1996 with Eric Paulus. Is Eric here? Nope, maybe. John Canny, Judith Donath, and Will Lynn. And this was an online telerobotic laboratory that allows users to perform experiments in US currency. And the main point of Legal Tender was to heighten the uncertainties built into the very interactivity on the web, which was early at this point, right, 1996. And the kind of continuing this kind of incredulity towards images and other information. And what does this mean for the next iterations of the internet? So we're way beyond this now, but we can talk about this later. So, getting to Amy Critchett in 1996. Amy. In 1996, I know we, my posse of weird people, flocked to the SRL show that was produced by Wired in San Francisco. And this was like the punk, shocking, do-it-yourself, transgressive, surreal, full-on situationist détournement that was SRL that we wanted to see again. And I didn't know until most recently that this is where Mark and Amy met, and Amy was producing Mark's show. So this was very exciting to me to discover this. Not only is Amy then now married to Mark Pauline and the mother of their 12-year-old, which I think is kind of the way, I like the mother, the wife, but beyond that, a very big cat. Amy Starr is part of the Bay Lights. Well, she's the executive producer of the Bay Lights, and is leading the development and management of Leo Villareal's largest artworks to date, working on the next project, which she'll be showing us, that's going to be in the Thames in London, on the Thames in London, the bridge. She's built community, she's grown national awareness, and assembled a world-class team to produce this complex and highly creative ongoing event. She's also the founding executive director of 01 and the Art and Technology Network and its biannual International Arts Festival. Amy was part of the initial team that launched and built Wired magazine. She later held the executive producer position for cutting-edge convergence cable startups, ZDTV and Oxygen Media. And she followed on in this just remarkable career, first in New York City and then coming out west as director of marketing for the online leaders One Economy and UTH TV and business development for the startup of Cho Chocolates. And we have a lot of convergences with Amy Critchett here in our community at Berkeley and all the extraordinary work that she's done. Most recently, Amy has started is it an app on Art+Audience, which combines, in a lot of ways, very similar to what we've tried to achieve in this course. Artists who are emerging to accomplished artists, connecting them with art entities, not-for-profits, for-profits, civic agencies, institutions, and media, and the audience, enthusiast, seeker, collector, patron. So I would like to bring up to the stage Mark, Pauline, and Amy Critchett. Thank you for the long introduction.
Well, is there anything left to say after all that? Maybe. So exciting to be here with Amy Critchett. So, I came from a faraway place long ago where everything for a young person was counterculture. That's all there was. There was really nothing else. And in the 60s and 70s, and I was a part of that. I do see it's going. Wait a minute. Whoa. Let me try to go back again. Okay. Yeah, start it over again. Sorry. And do I start it by pressing the red?
No, that remote only works for the PowerPoint.
Okay. Okay, stop right there. Yeah. So I was part of that stuff. I sucked it all in. I had things I admired about it. I admired the political radicalism, a little bit more toward the violent end probably. I always kind of imagined myself going off, running around the country, surreptitiously blowing up factories and, things like that when I was a kid. Bill Ayers was a great, I was a big fan of his and stuff he was doing and all the other radical groups. But, I never, my problem was, because of other things in my history, is I was never really a believer. And so I could never really get behind really doing that stuff other than just, in my fantasy world. But I was admiring that. And then I went for a couple years before I went to college, and I worked in, I wanted to learn how to make money because I wanted to be an artist, but I wanted to learn how to make money first. So I did all kinds of, I ended up finding out that other people ended up finding out I was pretty skilled. And so I ended up working for military contractors, making huge 30-ton robots that were target robots. And at 18 years old, ended up being the foreman on that project. I worked in the oil fields in Santa Barbara, all kinds of evil stuff, which really gave me a very clear understanding about how I could never believe in the world of practicality and product or war making or anything, because I really had firsthand awareness of it. But through all this stuff, I came to be an admirer of the techniques and the tools of these parts of the culture I didn't like. In the same way that I was an admirer of radical politics, I never really could be a murderer, or like a real destructive kind of person. So, all this stuff, kind of came to a head really in college, and this is the representation of it, okay? This is my decision to go from being part of the counterculture to actually participating in it. So I made this sculpture back, I don't know, my second year in college, and there it is. It's like, it's not about anything. It's not about, obviously, a hammer tied in a knot isn't about believing anything, but the idea that some kind of nonsense or some kind of twist of reality could be a thing that you would present to the public, and whether it made sense or meant anything wasn't really the important part. That was something that I began to consider, at least subconsciously. I was still in college. You don't really make up your mind about anything in college, but you do think a lot. You go through a lot of phases. Now, after college, I was technically a pretty proficient artist in college, and I had the trust of, my mentor whose wife owned a gallery, and they offered me a show right after I got out of college in a pretty well-known gallery in Florida, which doesn't really count as the real world, but back then it was more real than it is now. And so, I went to the meeting and I decided what I wanted to do. And she goes, well, what do you want to do, Mark? And I said, well, here's what I want to do. I want to go around and I want to go take all these billboards around Sarasota, and I'm gonna draw these things to finish them up and make them like really what they're really about, what they're really advertising. I'm going to finish them up. And I had sketches of some of the billboards, and she goes, and then I'm going to take pictures of them and put them in your gallery. And she just looked at me and she goes, well, that's illegal. And I said, okay. She goes, we can't do that. That's against the law. We could never do something like that. Maybe you need to rethink it. And I'm like, okay. So I rethought it, and I moved out to San Francisco. And you can start it now. So I moved out to San Francisco and just started, I just finished it up. I didn't have, gallery representation, but there was a big audience. It was illegal, of course, so I would get a Foster and Kleiser jumpsuit and paint Foster and Kleiser on. Just go out in the middle of the day and do it. I like to play fair with the police and the authorities. And so, I gave them a fair chance to arrest me or stop me, and nobody ever did. These are some that were on banks, in the domestic cat as well as among the larger feline. The neck bite during copulation is a common occurrence. The neck bite was the warning. So we said we would, I'd say stuff. I always put warnings on these things. So that was kind of my Weather Underground influences acting out there. So I did this for like a year or so in San Francisco. I did them all over the place. Telly Savalas, I put up a bunch of these, but I somehow I felt that my future as a billboard artist was just like, I wanted something that could take into account all of my interests, which included like tools and technology of the military, of the science world, Weather Underground politics, that kind of thing. I wanted to really, there you go. There's some, I wanted to usurp the tools that I saw the really powerful agencies in our society using. So I decided to form, I sat down for a couple weeks and just thought up the idea of survival research labs. So the idea basically was that it combined all the things I was interested in, and then I would, you've probably heard of Edgar Allan Poe, The Imp of the Perverse. It's a story about how if you walk up to a cliff, if you're the kind of person that walks up the edge of the cliff and always wants to jump off, that's the imp of the perverse, like telling you. And if you're crazy enough, you'll just do it. Or if you're on enough drugs, you'll just do it. And so you can just let this run, but turn the sound down, please. And so, I've never really had that kind of infection, but I've definitely been bit by the imp of the subverse, which means that everything you see, the writing on the box of cereal you're eating in the morning, everything, you want to do something to mess it up a little bit. And so it's a compulsion. It's a sickness. And so SRL was the way for me to deal with this sickness. And now in the 70s, it was me and a couple of my friends, the 70s, early 80s, and me and a couple of my friends. But, the shows started getting bigger and more people got interested. There were scientists who wanted to be part of it. Phil Paul from Stanford, he got involved. In the 80s, a couple, Matt Haggart, Eric Werner said, hey, we want to really work with you on this. So in the 80s, we moved to 82, we moved to a bigger place, and we all moved in together. This was like 81, 82, and this was the first show where other people actually built machines that were in the shows. I'd been doing it for 4 years here. Sorry, the bunnies, yeah, I know. This is not the place with bunnies. But needless to say, this is a fact of life. But, I want to tell one anecdote about the bunnies. So I used to help the people who were Earth First people back in the 80s. And I used to help them do stuff. And they told me that because I helped them, that I would never have protests from the animal rights people. They would spread the word around, and we never, ever did. But anyway, you can just keep this going. That's okay. You don't have to rewind it. We've seen enough. So anyway, so in the, and then later on in the 80s, surprisingly enough, I'd formed it as a company, really just thinking, hey, companies, if you want to get away with murder, you're a company, right? As been proven by Supreme Court decisions, I was right. I was totally right. Now, if I had anybody with any brains is going to form themselves a company these days because you have even more rights. You can launder money. You can do all that stuff. But back then, it was just a way to kind of get away with anything. Nobody can say no to a company, I found back then. And so you can turn the sound up now. I want to hear this. This is good. So this is a live TV show.
What is it you do? What is it? Right now, what I'm going to do is you're going to hear a very unusual noise. After you hear that unusual noise, this cover here is not going to be there anymore. Right. This cover is going to be gone. That white cover right there on that face is going to be gone. You're just going to see something even more unusual under there. And after that, we're going to be firing at it with Monty Kazaza on the special exploding dart gun.
Monty Kazaza is on the...
Kazaza right there.
Nice round of applause for Monty Kazaza. Monty, you're looking good tonight.
And then we're going to cut to this catapult right here.
All right.
And fire boulders and spears.
All right, this catapult is directed at the white board. Now, what's the point of all of this?
Well, it's based on the design of Alexander the Great, and the point is to provide the people here in the audience with some anti-escapist entertainment, something that's going to bring them into touch with some of the worst experiences they've ever had.
All right.
Yeah, so that's the pinnacle of they can't say no to you is that thing. I mean, they let me do that live with explosives and all kinds of stuff for a TV show. A couple of people got fired, it's true, but and so this just went on and on. The shows got bigger. We got everyone. They just let us get into bigger and bigger venues. The technology increased all through the 80s, and it just kind of kept moving. And here's another thing. I think that these are kind of the statements that you could see at a political rally these days. Right? So now I know how the political entities that are in power now I know where they got their ideas. You know where I got these from? There's a self-help book, and I just took all the things and flipped them around the other way, and look, this is it, man. This is like the Bible for the country right now, right? The weakness in others is your only strength. Anyway. So leaflet bombs to spread the messages, in this case, not InfoWars. But anyway, we were trying. So, things just got progressively, more advanced. Matt Heckert and Eric Werner, we were there together, working together for about 5 years. They went off on their own in like 87 and end of 87, 88. And SRL reformed as like a real company, a real organization with like a bunch of people, and like we went around the world doing these shows, and New York City, and People Magazine, all this crazy business, and you just couldn't stick your foot in your mouth. You could just do the weirdest, craziest things, and people just. There was always seemed to be willing co-conspirators at, to help produce the shows, to publicize the shows, to parrot really whatever I wanted them to parrot in the media. It was pretty amazing. We got, this things that maybe won't happen nowadays, but the state of California just gave us this 10,000 square foot building for 4 weeks to shoot this movie. Crazy. Panavision gave us the cameras for free, and again, all stemming from this idea of being a company. But always the idea was that even though we started out from a fairly crude point, we're still in Northern California, where the tech industry was just really starting to get its legs. And so always, at your fingertips, there was the detritus of the changeover from an industrial kind of economy around here, shipping economy, to a high-tech economy. And that meant that there were you're probably wondering where all this shit came from, right? Well, there were just dozens of abandoned warehouses that you could just walk into and just take stuff. And so I didn't really need grants or anything like that, You could just sort of self-grant, It's like that whole idea, right, of like, self-deporting, but this is real. Like you can really just walk in and do it, and nobody would do anything to you. It was kind of amazing. And so all of this equipment it came from somewhere, and then it ended up at SRL. And so all this stuff, even though we always tried from the very beginning to use the technology to the advancement level that we possibly could, and always to really make a strong parody or a strong satirical statement about the culture at large. The philosophy has always been, if you're really going to do it, you have to know the tools, the technology. You have to be able to you have to know on the same level that a Fortune 500 company knows how to do it. And that was always the goal. And, as things progressed, we moved further. I have to say it, I saw somebody in the audience with a KLA 10 core shirt on. And I just have to say that I love KLA 10 core, because KLA 10 core, without knowing it, they are a huge backer of Survival Research Labs. I sell the shit out of their semiconductor equipment. People love that stuff. And I wish I had a KLA 10 core t-shirt. Maybe I should make some so I could sneak in there without signing an NDA. So anyway, SRL, moved along. We do a couple of these shows a year. This has been, probably, I don't know, like on some of these shows, these bigger productions, probably up to 100 people are working on the shows. And we just, I just have to tell you that we just have some of the most amazing people at SRL. I mean, people who are now at, of course now most of us are all kind of grown up. People work at Google. People made their millions with .com stocks, But most of the same people all the way, I'm not embarrassed to say it, but they might be. But most of the same people all the way stretching back to the 80s are still involved in these shows to this day. Many of them are here, but like I said, no embarrassment, right? I'm not pushing. I'm not going to ask anybody to raise their hands or, nothing like that. What? Well, if they want to, yeah. So, on into the 2000s, it became a little harder to do shows here. So we were arranging out more. A lot of shows happened in LA in the 2000s, and the technology, continued to get more advanced. Pitching machines, shooting 2x4 boards at 200 miles an hour. That's a way to solve the housing problem, right there. Anyway, so we continued trying to stretch the limits of technology and doing these big shows. It became a little bit more difficult to get people to work with us. It slowly became more difficult, and then but we were still going to Amsterdam and doing fun stuff like this in Amsterdam. In Europe, they come to these shows and they're just like, what the fuck? They're just like, what? This isn't the circus. I remember we got a review one time in Austria, and the reviewer basically said, we thought this was going to be like some kind of a beautiful like robot show or something like that, but it was just ugly. It was just really ugly. And they translated it for me, and it was amazing. So anyway, this is the most recent thing we did. Now the city's letting us do shows in San Francisco again, which is great because they're really hard up to keep people there, and I guess they figure that that people might stay there because weird shit like this just happens on the back streets at any given moment. So now they're letting it. This happened last year in the last April. So The real barrier these days is money. After 2008, my ability to make millions of dollars a year, that's the other thing, is Vail was right. I didn't have a trust fund like most successful artists, and I wasn't from a rich family or anything like that. So I had to either get the stuff or make the money. Now I have to make the money because you have to pay for everything now. This is the current project that I'm working on. This is a very advanced type of flamethrower. This was inspired. This was inspired by. What the hell did inspire this thing? Look at that! How much wind it puts out? 50 horsepower wind. But it was in. I know, save the two strokes. Everyone's got a thing they want to do. Like I said, save the whales. I could appreciate that, but there's something about a two-stroke engine. I don't know if any of you are old enough to have experienced it, but a two-stroke engine is it's like your ultimate servant. It'll do anything. It'll blow itself up to serve you with horsepower and energy. It'll be as light as possible. It's an engine that's ready to die for you. And they're slowly disappearing because of, pollution reasons and stuff. But that's no reason to want to save them. So I know that there's never going to be like a big move to, to have two strokes in cars like those old Saabs and stuff. So I thought that I would figure out an excuse to have a big 500cc two-stroke motor. And so I came up with this idea of using this is how it comes about. This is how the subversive mind works. So the two-stroke. First, I was joking around thinking, and I didn't even smoke pot, right? So I'm just thinking, daydreaming. Yeah, save the whale, save the two strokes. Yeah, what a great idea. Oh, well, let's see. Two strokes have a lot of horsepower, power to weight ratio. Well, you could make a flamethrower with a two-stroke because of all that power. You could turn it into air. And I've got this pump from an M1 Abrams tank that's an air pump to cool the crew off from the turbine in there. Yeah, you could make a flamethrower. Oh, and then I got a robot arm too. And if I made it light enough, you could put the flamethrower on the end of the arm and spin it around. So I got to looking at it, and then I realized that it had to be really, a good flamethrower. It couldn't be just some lame ass flamethrower. It wouldn't be some little prancing propane flamethrower like we usually see at most places that have flamethrowers. Some ridiculous poofy flamethrower. So I decided to make one that uses diesel, in keeping with the whole two-stroke meme. And but I went around and I realized that the best technology for atomizing diesel is made by Parker Hannifin. And I was like, I looked at their technology, macro spray. We're using this in all the new fighter jet engines. I was like, great, check. It's a military use. That's one thing. You know, it's like makes it so we can run supersonic for our bombing runs without running an afterburner. Check. Great, you know. I can reuse this technology, and it's brand new stuff. So I went and I built a lot of this stuff. Then I went and called Parker Hannaford, and I got this guy on the phone. They go, we're going to have to talk to this guy. And I was like, I got this guy on the phone. He goes, well, you know, we don't sell these. We don't sell this technology. And I was like, what do you mean? And he goes, well, we send out, we send out a prototype nozzle, and then it goes to General Electric or Pratt and Whitney, and then they design an engine around it. And then we integrate the macro spray technology into their nozzle, their combustion chamber. I was like, oh, okay. They go, it's ITAR regulated. This is controlled technology. You can't take it out of the country, blah, blah, blah. And you have to get permission to use it from the government. I was like, okay. So 40 pages of applications later, and this guy, who they personally had shepherded me through the whole thing, they gave me permission to do it. He pushed it through. I got permission to use these nozzles. Then I went to buy them, and they go, well, we don't have them. And I was like, what do you mean you don't have them? And he goes, well, these are, you know, we build these by hand, custom make these things. There's all these microstructures in there. It costs us probably $5,000 each to make one. I was like, well, wait a minute, whoa, how much are you going to charge me? And he goes, well, how about $50? He goes, there's no real price on them. Can $50? And he goes, well, how many do you want? And I said, well, I need 9. He goes, well, we'll ask for 12. They'll probably give us 10. And I was like, okay. So I got them, and you can see when you have a controlled item like this, this is the receipt you get. Diversion contrary to U.S. law prohibited. These items are not to be used directly or indirectly for prohibited nuclear, chemical, biological, missile weapon activities. So that means you have the good stuff. That's the good stuff. I cannot take these out of the country without a permit. I cannot show them I can't take it apart. Anyway, so I did get them, and I am now in the process of finishing it. All of those parts you saw just recently were parts of the fuel injector, and we're estimating a 30-foot flame, and we're hoping to reach adiabatic temperature for the combustion. Everyone here knows what adiabatic temperature is, right? It is the maximum temperature of flame that is doing no useful work. So that is a subversive flame. It's not doing anything. The flame in your car, when it's pushing the cylinder down, when it does work, it cools off. So that's why they call them heat engines. So this is not a heat engine. This is just heat, pure heat. So we will be doing something with this in the city. Flamethrower postcards from San Francisco, hopefully in the summer. And I think my 15 minutes are up. That's all I really have to say. I hope that, now it's my wife's turn.
I'll set this up for you.
Thank you. Isn't he sweet? So, another thing that you might have mentioned, Mark, is actually we're going to do our first crowdsourcing experiment around San Francisco, flamethrower postcards from San Francisco. Yeah, we're going to do some cyber begging. And because the idea is not only to stage these experiences around San Francisco in front of iconic vistas, we're also going to film it in 3D video, and it'll probably be the first VR experience for survival research laboratories. And also, if some of the conversations that I'm having actually come to fruition, we might travel the show to Art Basel next year to be on display. So, right? So before I start, I want to give credit where credit is due. This beautiful tree is the artwork of Edgar, who is here in the audience with us, one of the preeminent digital artists of our time. I had the pleasure of meeting and working with Eric at Wired Magazine in the early 90s, and then he was the creative spearhead behind Hot Wired, which was the first website that ever integrated. Oh, look, that guy's asleep. That's awesome. I miss college, man. I remembered I stopped smoking pot and going into class the day in my Japanese class they started writing on the board in hiragana. I was like, oh, that doesn't work. But so anyway, so Hotwired, the work that we did, and also here with my dear colleague Tara Hoffman and dear Jessica is up there somewhere. At Wired Magazine and Hotwired, I'm sorry, we are responsible for the first advertising on the internet. So in addition to Wired and things like that, and I'm just going to go quickly, I just wanted to share a little bit of my story, which is I had a very different 70s than my esteemed husband, because I'm a decade and a little bit more younger than he is. So in the 70s, my world was I was in elementary school and junior high in Petaluma, California, and which is where Mark and I live now with our 12-year-old son, Jake Eddie, and our kitty cat, Zoe. And when I was a few years younger than Jake Eddie, when I was 10 in 1976, my fabulous mother piled myself and my 3 older brothers in our Volkswagen bus and said, we're going to go look at some art, and we're going to go look at a fence. And that night, she took us to go see Christo's running fence. And for a 10-year-old, I had no idea what to expect. Quite honestly, we had a whole other experience where they piled us in the VW and took us to go see Magical Mystery Tour. So in my head, I thought we were going to see some crazy, psychedelic, colorful art piece. And here we are, in Northern California, experiencing this incredible piece of monumental public art. And it's an experience that has stayed with me forever. And a few years later, 30-some-odd years later, I was invited by Ben Davis, who had a great idea. Ben Davis had the idea to create a piece of public art on the side of the Bay Bridge. He had relationships with Caltrans at a really high level and was vetting the idea through the hallowed halls of the agency for about a year. He hooked up with the artist Leo Villareal, and Leo made a rendering. And about that point is when they invited me to join them to create what is now the Bay Lights. And the Bay Lights, which I hope you all have seen, is now a permanent installation on the west span of the Bay Bridge. And as you can imagine, it's certainly something that I'm quite proud of, but also it was the end result of the artwork, but also the process and the outpouring of community support and engagement, which was really an important and driving force for me. As you can imagine, lots of moving parts to be the executive producer of a project like this. And first and foremost, really the most important thing is the art and the artist. So I don't know if you all are familiar with Leo Villareal's work other than the Bay Lights, but he is the world preeminent LED light sculpture artist and has work in museums and private collections all over the world. And he and I continue to work together on his other pieces of public art. But in terms of the Bay Lights, it's an artist, but it's also a structure. And it's a structure that is one of the most important pieces of infrastructure in Northern California. So that's us climbing to the top of the bridge. That's what it looks like, right, John Long? In addition to the bridge, there's lots and lots and lots and lots of meetings and lots and lots and lots and lots of agencies and lots of just smiling real nice and asking, with a very, transparent and heartfelt plea to make some incredible and life-affirming public art. Also, lots and lots and lots of patrons. As I'm sure most of you know, a big part of the producing of the Bay Lights was raising initially $8 million for the first 2 years and then another $4 million to reinstall them permanently. So God bless every one of our patrons, including those who contributed through our, we were experimenting in 2010 and 2011. It was early days of crowdfunding. So we raised about $250,000 in the initial $8 million through crowdsourcing, and that was, it's a big number. It was a small number in relationship to the overall budget, but it really, to me, meant more and had a different value than the incredible and very generous patronage of the philanthropists that I had the honor of working with. Of course, press played a big role. You know, we stopped counting at 50 million impressions. We also had a film created about our project. I was fortunate enough to be introduced through Ben to a filmmaker who wanted to make his first documentary. So Jeremy Ambers, who's an incredible filmmaker, literally came to almost any meeting I would invite him to for about 3 years. And note to self, if you ever have a camera following you, brush your hair. We did, you know, as you can imagine, social media and the imprint of a piece of work like a public piece of work like the Baylights is so exciting to see how it reverberates outside of the standing on the Embarcadero and seeing the piece itself. I'm very passionate about the opportunity of engaging with the arts in interesting and exciting ways. You know, we experimented, we did all sorts of limited edition collaborations with different artists. This video globe was created by J.D. Beltram, and so when you shake it and you look into it, you actually see video of the Baylights. We had a pendant, the Illuminode pendant. Leo, we collaborated with some friends down in LA, Illuminode, and then Leo did sequences in the pendant itself. So on and on and on. I mean, my absolute honor and privilege to work on the project and work with the people that I did. It was equal parts, hardcore to, fabulous, and, thanking everyone for their support and their participation. So now this takes us on to what Leo and I are doing together out in the rest of the world. Thank you. So we've been invited to do 4 competitions in the past 18 months, and we've won each and every one of them. This is the biggest. This is going to be lighting upwards to 17, 15, maybe 13 bridges on the River Thames, from the Tower Bridge all the way through to the Albert Bridge. And we're going back in June. Leo's studio is in New York, so I have the privilege of spending most of my time in my home office, in my kitchen. And you put on some lipstick in the video conference. They don't know that you're in your pajamas. So with Leo, we're working on this project in London. We have exciting projects in Los Angeles, also in Sydney. We recently won a competition that we're going to participate in the building of the largest building in Australia. Our original idea was to have the entire tower be a 4-sided artwork. They recently told us they have to shave $150 million off the project, so we're going to have to rethink. New Zealand, Paris, Tokyo. I mean, it's prolific. Leo's career and the work that we're doing is we're definitely on a rocket ship. But speaking of a rocket ship, I'm also married to this guy. And so, as Natasha mentioned, part of, what I'm really excited about is this interaction between art and audience. And again, working on the Baylights and really spending all that time and energy to facilitate community and to engage from, the highest level of philanthropy to, the Caltrans worker who spent, hours and hours and hours and hours with me in meetings, because each and every one of those meetings we were making art. And then also seeing Leo as an artist, and I was like, wait, what, you make money? Like, it was just so interesting to me because of this amazing person I'm married to. I've decided to pursue some ideas around the fact that culture is content and that audience is a form of enterprise. And because I believe that it's important for artists to be able to make a living, and I believe that there's a way to create a connection with the art world that is now missing. Because there are so many different factions and so many different levels and so many different inputs and so many different types of artists and types of arts and types of experiences, what we're missing is what I hope to help solve with which now is in beta, my mobile app called OnView. And OnView is going to be, it's almost like a dating site for art and audience. And it's a preference engine. I'm not making any content. Basically what I'm doing is when John Law becomes a user, he'll say, this is what I like. And so what OnView will do will serve him what he is interested in. His interests might be different than, will be different than probably everybody else's. But so it's a combination. It's really using what's already there, right? It's all there on the internet. I can't tell you how many people say, I need to know what Mark is doing. Why don't I understand what Mark is doing? Well, you can either go to srl.org, which is rarely updated, or OnView will be, if someone says, I'm interested in Mark Pauline, OnView will be there collecting prompts from the internet and from social media that relate to stories about or anything that the artist is interested in having be forthcoming in building audience. Because what do we know? We know art is everywhere, and from an artist's perspective, activating your audience is their choice. My husband will, look, there we are with Obama. Right there. Oh my God, I was watching the news the other day, and all of a sudden Obama's voice came on the TV. I literally started to cry. It was just, it just was such a visceral, shock. I was like, ugh, I miss you. But my point in this is that, I don't want to create a company around presuming how artists want to engage with their audience. We live in a technological world full of opportunities, and my company and my platform is going to be as much about artists choosing how they want to engage as the audience has those choices as well. So, what do we know? You don't have to be commercial to be successful, my sweet love. But you have to make a living. I guess I made this for my. So there. So, and in my heart of hearts, I believe, if an audience expects art, it'll create an economy that funds it. So, expect art, yo. That's our kitty cat.
Let's start with a couple questions and then open it up. I think it will be yours in a second. I'll pass it to you. Your necklace is beautiful. All right. We have about 15 more minutes, so we were going to engage in a Q&A, and I'm just going to ask our guests, Mark and Amy, a couple questions, but then I really want to open it up to the audience as quickly as possible so that we can engage in a broader discussion. We're in a museum, guys, and both of you just showed work that clearly is non-museumifiable, if that's possible to say, almost not collectionable, if that's another word. So I wanted to ask you, and I know that Amy has some ideas about this, but both of your works also in some ways are in a dialectic in terms of, what Mark is doing, what Amy is doing in the public. They're both engaged in the public, but they're also approaching this public art in very different ways and engaged in the commodification of art in different ways. So first question is, how do you make objects, how do these disobedient objects ever get into a museum? Or do you want them to? Or what does that mean to have your objects enter into a museum? Mark.
Nope. Don't give him
Wife.
the mic.
Okay.
I'm going to answer for the family. No, honey. So, see, Mark and I actually have differing opinions on this. I believe
Obviously.
that there is a huge opportunity for Mark's work to be viewable in the museum context, especially if there was a brilliant curator who was able to create that context in a way that was true and pure and appropriate. I've had conversations with gallerists who have schooled me on, there's no reason to even consider having your work in a gallery or museum if it's not, a beautiful object to observe. And beauty is of the eyes in the eyes of the beholder. So I think the Mark's disobedient objects certainly have a place. And by the way, in this next chapter in our life, remember that kid I showed you? He's got to go to college at some point. So these disobedient objects are going to need to turn into a source of revenue here pretty quick.
Well, I get the last say. No, but I mean, I'd work with Satan himself or herself, no problem. I mean, if a museum wanted me to be in a museum, or if a gallery wanted a museum, I'd go for it. But somehow it seems like intrinsically, and I don't even know how, it's just like maybe genetic, somehow like the imp of the subverse. There's something I'm doing wrong on so many levels, even though it's very public and it's, very widely unknown, I like to say, SRL stuff. But still, it's like there's something, maybe it's the smell, I don't know. Like when I leave the Bay Area, I swear, I just have this feeling that everyone's looking at it like, you fucking freak, I'll kill you, I swear. I mean, that's why I moved to the Bay Area, because you don't get that feel. You can walk around and people aren't like looking at you like they want to, do something to you, That's why I stayed here. But, I'm doing something wrong, but I think I'm doing so many things wrong that I don't even know.
I'd like to open that up to the audience, because I think there's a lot there, and there are questions up there.
Hi, I have a comment and then a question. The comment is, Mark, you're doing so much shit so right that you get to stand up and be proud of what you're doing. So let's just acknowledge that.
Yeah.
And I'd like to know if Amy and Mark have ever given a presentation together before.
Yes? Yeah, the Wired Show.
1996.
Right. Well, wherever Ken just disappeared to. Once we did a talk with...
He had to go to office hours. He's sorry.
Well, so Ken and Tiffany and Mark and I did something together at one point.
Yeah, in the museum.
Oh, yeah.
So the imps of the subversive do get stage time. You called yourself an imp of the subversive, which I really appreciated that line.
Imp of the subverse.
Imp of the subverse. I want to see, anybody else have a, yes. Oh, yes, please stand up. John? Can you please tell the students who you are a little bit? Because your name has been referred to a few times today.
My name is John Law. I've known Mark since 1981, and I've known Amy since 1996. And I have the greatest admiration for both of them. Mark in particular is, and you don't know this, students, because you won't read it in most history books, not yet, but Mark is one of the most important artists of the 20th century, hands down. If you look at popular culture right now, today, and things that are going on in popular culture, his work and the work of the many collaborators, scientists and artists who have worked with him resonates in all kinds of things. And he's going to hate this, but the stupid Burning Man event, okay, every fire art, every machine art thing of any consequence that's happened at Burning Man has a direct and completely direct line to SRL, was inspired by it. The principals in those groups, every single one of them apprenticed in some degree or some capacity at SRL, and that's a fucking fact. Every time you look on TV and you see some
Mythbusters.
crazy Mythbusters, starting with Mythbusters, every time you look on TV and see some guy or gal in crazy coveralls with dreadlocks welding something that goes directly back to SRL, and by the time you're my age, everyone will know that. So.
Well,
Right on.
the only thing I can say in response is me and John Law met over human skin. John Law called me up in the 80s and he goes, this friend of mine, and you don't know me, but this friend of mine, like, he's got a whole freezer full of human skin. And like, his roommate committed suicide with a machine gun. And like, we've got to get the human skin out of the freezer. And can I bring it to your place? And I'm like, I'm not exaggerating any.
There.
This is what happened. So John Law brought the skin over to my place. Got a special freezer for the human skin. And then for Research Magazine, for their pranks, Modern Primitives issue, I had Greg Kultz, a very respected tattoo artist, tattoo all over the skin. And we sewed it together so it looked like a human body again.
Gross.
And put it on display at a couple of their book signings. So human skin is a great social lubricant.
Speaking of social lubricant, go ahead. Yeah.
I have a question about kind of the history of Bay Area public interactive renegade art regarding the old sculptures that used to be out at the Emeryville Mudflats. I think there's actually some photos of them in the exhibit right now.
The modernism show, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And so my question is just, I think that institution, of people taking the garbage out there and building these giant, crazy sculptures that people could see from the highway started around like the early 60s. And I'm just wondering if anything that you guys have done or any of the people you've worked with or yourselves have been inspired by the mudflat sculptures, which I know lasted for a few decades out there on and off.
That's a great question. I'm going to pass it on to Mark, but those were sort of almost monumental and non-ephemeral. I don't know if we call your work ephemeral because it doesn't seem ephemeral at all. But
I totally remember them as
Yeah.
a kid, and
Yeah.
they were. I mean, it was an incredible.
and yeah,
Yeah, I mean, to me, they're just a monument of that people were just letting people do stuff, that permissivity, which was great. I mean, they were emblematic of that. And of course, the flip side of that was they made them take them all away, So that wasn't really the message so much. I mean, I kind of got that as a message, but once they removed them all, I really got the message like, okay, we can't have fun. Nobody can have fun. Everything has some evil, nefarious impact that basically the bottom line is you can't do anything fun that's outside the lines. So even Berkeley, or what Emeryville, I don't know who has jurisdiction over it. Maybe who would have had jurisdiction over that?
the railroad, yeah,
The railroads, yeah,
bullet
that's
train
it.
to go north now.
Railroad barons. I'm mad. I'm pissed.
And
Next time I do a show, it's going to be on railroad property.
Other questions? Oh, there's a young person, a tiny person.
I have a question about the machines. Why are there so much animal cruelty? I mean, dead animals. Dead animals.
Well, there is a use of animals in our shows that I feel is emblematic. And basically, I thought I turned that off. Holy crap. Saved by the buzzer. No, but I do that because, I basically mostly vegetarian. I don't eat a lot of meat and I hate preparing it. But, to me, there's something really creepy about it. And having things like that in our shows means that we're never going to be able to be mainstream. We'll never be on TV. We'll never be considered like maybe in a gallery or a museum kind of setting, because there's always a chance that if we went there one time, there's always a chance we might do it again. And, back, maybe now with Damien Hirst and his shark and stuff, but, the SRO machines aren't in tanks of formaldehyde, they're like right out there. But, I just like to say that every time we've done that, we've tried to do it humanely. The pigs we used in our show in LA, we ate them, or ate one of them afterwards, which was partially cooked by the jet engine, but, basically, to me, it's emblematic, and I feel like it makes sense as an emblem of cruelty in the same way that the machines are emblematic of, like, abuse of power. All of our servo mechanisms, all of our cruelty is bound up in our projected selves, whether that be through eating other animals because we can, or destroying things, or having, with machinery or inventions because we can get away with it. So,
And
I mean,
also, the
it's just
animals,
creepy, though.
Well, it's super creepy, but and the animals are never killed for the show or at the show. It's always Mark sources his materials from sources that are humanely, sort of.
Yeah, in the same way. I mean, I don't smoke cigarettes, but I do smoke, once a year or twice a year at these shows. I mean, stuff burns. So, I feel like I feel like that the use of resources, including, we obviously don't always use animals, but sometimes we do. The use of resources and other, animal resources even, I feel like from the entertainment effect or the impact it has, and the fact that I don't think it really is endorsing that kind of stuff. Again, I'm not a believer. And so not being a believer, I really don't have a point to what I do. Identifiable point. It's more of an attitude.
So here's a quick story. In 1995, I was ordered to meet Mark Pauline by our bosses, Jane Metcalf and Louis Rossetto of Wired Magazine, because they were huge fans and supporters, etc. And I was like, no, creepy. He uses animal. Seriously, I was not into it. And but we met, and it was great. And we had a very instantaneous respect, and some of us had different ideas than the other one in that form, but because it took 10 years for us to get married. But one of our production calls, I said to Mark on the phone, I said, oh, and by the way, we were well into, we had a venue, we had a date, the whole thing. I said, oh, by the way, can you not have any dead animals in this show? He said, okay, and he hung up the phone. And his crew was surrounding him. Lisa Pine, if you're here, he said, Lisa, go get the cats. So because I asked him not to, he made me a tree of dead cats. That was part of the show. But the kitties they were mummies that came out of the tunnels in the
train tunnels in
tunnels.
San Francisco.
The trains again.
Train tunnels where animals go and they get cut in half by trains. And because of the conditions, they dry out and mummify perfectly, like those caves in like Mexico or things like that. And so you can collect them every couple of years. They'll dry out and you can collect them.
Yeah, a form of obtainium. Other students, yes, here. Students, participate. Thank you.
Hi. So first of all, I'm super into what you're doing. I think it's super interesting. What keeps you doing it if you don't believe in anything or don't believe that it has like purpose?
Well, that's what keeps me doing it, because there's no real point to it. There's no purpose to it. But I think that that's a very healthy way to look at it, that there's no real reason to do it. I'm certainly not making any money on it. But basically it's like being a company without a reason for what you're doing and without any money. That's what Survival Research Labs is. If you subtract those two things, it does everything else. It does promotions, there's advertising, there's products that get made, that get used, that get viewed. There's, you have to talk to people in public about it. It's everything, except there's no point to it, like the hammer tied in a knot, But it doesn't mean it's not worth watching.
Is it like...
I don't recommend it to anybody.
Is it like a form of hedonism?
A form of hedonism. It's a form of slavery. It's really taking technology and bowing down to it and listening to what the machines say. That's my thing. I mean, on the level of actual, physical connection with the whole experience, it's basically looking at an inanimate thing, trying to understand it, and trying to do what it wants you to without asking any questions.
Thank you.
Hello. You say it's not about anything. And
nothing.
And yet, it makes people think. And your original sculpture with the knotted hammer was your transition from observing the counterculture to becoming part of it. And your flyers, your leaflets, are the exact shit we're seeing now in our government and our media, and that was almost a prediction of the future. So I would posit for the students that it's not, he might say it's about nothing, but it's really to make people think, if I may, and it's also to think about how subversive action challenges the norm and the culture that we're seeing right now. So I would give Mark a bit more credit than he gives himself.
Yeah, well, I think the problem with believing it is then you really think you're right. And then if you think you're right, then you can't really listen to anybody else. And you can't really understand what you don't like about things, you know? And so that's, you know, I resolve. And, you know, the other thing is real heavy politics. It just always ends, you know, in violence or death or something. And, you know, I mean, that's great. Some people just say, well, that's just the way it goes, you know, to make things change, you got to kill people and break shit. But, you know, I never believed in that. And so I'm taking a more subtle approach with this. I'm going.
Hi, I have a question for Amy because Mark said that he's not a believer and there's no purpose to his work. I wanted to know if you are a believer and if you do have like a very explicit purpose in your work because I know when you mentioned like all the fundraising that went into the Bay Lights, I was like 12 million bucks. Like it had to have like had a purpose to it because there's like so much you could do with that. So yeah, I want to know.
Absolutely. No, I'm a total believer, and I believe in love, and I believe in magic, and I believe that we have the capacity to be, you know, decent humans and actually survive on this earth. I believe in art. I believe that now more than ever, artists, art experiences, opening one's mind to instigate thought and disruption is more important than ever. I'm also honored to be the daughter of a very progressive congresswoman, now retired, and I sat on the House floor with her while she argued in the 90s for funding in the NEA, and
Lynn Woolsey.
And
Great Lynn Woolsey.
The great Lynn Woolsey, thank you. And so, absolutely. I mean, I don't know do you remember the movie Cry Baby? No. Yeah, with Johnny Depp's like this total hardcore, and then he like ends up with like the good girl. Well, that's kind of us. You know what I mean? Like it's like, and so so yes, I believe in the power of art, and that's why I started a company called Art+Audience. I believe in that art is it's inevitable. If you're an artist, it's inevitable. You are going to create. You're going to slave. You're going to do whatever you need to create your work. And I believe it's really hard for an immersive audience experience to be cultivated by artists who aren't in a very, you know, delineated, you know, gallery practice collector, you know, which believe me, God bless, because I live in that world too. But there's so much creativity and there's so much inspiration and there's so much capacity to blow your mind and your heart open by interacting with artists, by seeing their work, and by just expecting that there is art in the world.
Very inspirational, right on. All right, we have time for a few, thank you, Amy. We have time for a few more questions.
In evaluating or self-evaluating your own work, would you characterize yourself as growing in the sense of your later work, your recent work, as compared to your earlier mechanical work?
Well, yeah, I mean, SRL is kind of, you know, it's my survival mechanism. And so part of that is just always having a system that maintains things that I can be curious about and presents things I can be curious about and act on. And so that's just really, you know, what it's about. I mean, being a creative person to me is about acting on, you know, whatever whims I have and always following that, whatever rabbit hole it leads down to. And, you know, I'm a working class guy, so I have this ingrained feeling that whatever rabbit hole I go down has to result in something practical happening in the end. And so, you know, that's what I do, really. And so I'm always searching out for new ways to twist technology, new ways to just basically twist things around. I mean, like the nozzle, the machines I make are either about just some kind of weird whim I get, or I see a type of technology that I want to twist it into something else, or use it in a way that's beyond what anybody, the engineers who created it are, or just thinking of something completely different, you know. I bootstrap whenever I can in a as, weird of a way as possible, but it's always been about learning, and I think that's part of what's attracted other people to it, and people who also want to learn, but in an unstructured, in the most totally unstructured environment you could possibly be in. I've never really worked at a real company before. I've always, I'm self-employed really since 1980, I've been self-employed. I worked a little in the union out here, and so I don't even have the experience of the structured life. And so it's just all about, whatever direction seems interesting and seems to maintain and amplify my interests, and that, the interests of people around me too, but it's my interests first, because I'm paying the bills, so I better like it.
So I see there's one more question. Let's take one more question.
Hi. It's not really a question. It's about the Emeryville Mudflat artist Tyler James Hoare. Tyler James Hoare is the artist who did a lot of them, and he has an exhibit at the Compound Gallery right now on 65th. And they did a really lovely interview with him about his work and what drove him to keep making those works, and he has a work that's going to be brought out to the Bay on the 6th of May from the gallery. So if anyone wants to get involved with that, I just think there's a nice synchronicity there in terms of what he's done, and totally opposite though.
But thank you for the information. Well, I know that I, for one, am looking forward to seeing what Amy and Mark are going to do next in trying to deal with these disobedient objects with new audiences. And here we go. I'm going to end this now and thank our are you coming? Are you just arriving? Oh, okay. We could continue on, but thank you, everyone, and thank you to Amy and Mark for being here with our last hurrah, large scale. Thank yous.